I'm Audrey Haynes, and I am a graduate student in integrative biology. I study plant ecology. I also have a background in outdoor education, leading river expeditions for young women. And I love to think interdisciplinarily, so the Parks Institute was the perfect venue for this. So the idea I'm going to present on today is leveraging autonomous vehicle technology to achieve conservation and green space goals. So to give you a little bit background, we hear a lot about autonomous vehicle technology these days, and there's really this huge potential for this technology to shift our public infrastructure, probably the biggest potential since the invention of the automobile itself, which is really exciting, but pretty much all the goals and innovations in this space are driven by technology companies. And so this is a place where the Parks Institute can have a big impact and really get our voice in there. So what would we like to do? We'd like to utilize this autonomous vehicle technology, but make sure that we are increasing green space and achieving our conservation goals. So here's an example of the Minneapolis Greenway, which is a greenway in Minneapolis. It's a bike path, but it used to be an old railway. And so that's an example of taking an old defunct infrastructure piece, railways, and transforming it into something nice and green for the public to use. In autonomous vehicles, we could imagine that we might not need parking anymore. And so we can transform those parking structures into parks or bike paths. How would we do this? I would propose that the Institute would bring together government entities, state, local, federal. If you perhaps watched Mark Zuckerberg be interviewed by Congress, you might have an idea of how behind the times Congress really is on this. So this is a place where they need a push in the right direction. So we would want to bring them to the table. We'd also, of course, engage technology companies are the ones who are coming up with this technology. And so we need their input on what's possible, what can we do. And then academic and industry experts. We're at a great place in Berkeley here. We have experts across many different disciplines, and this is inherently an interdisciplinary field. And then, of course, the public, because this is the public space that we're talking about. What would we do? I would propose that we would assess kind of the public policy tools, the technology companies' innovations, and what could be done, and then conservation needs, like what do we actually want to accomplish? And then from that assessment, we would develop a catalog of park models or policy tools or market-based tools to achieve those needs. And so that would really drive like what the technology companies are trying to achieve. And we would conduct meetings with all these different groups, workshops for cities that are interested in adopting some of these tools, conferences to exchange ideas. And so what would the outputs of this be? We don't really know right now because part of this is trying to figure out what do we want and what can be achieved. But some examples of things that maybe we could use autonomous vehicle technology to achieve would be a transition from car-dominated infrastructure to more green space. Like I mentioned earlier, we have all these parking spaces in our cities, and that could be transitioned into parks or bike paths or walking space. Another example would be an increase in urban mobility efficiency. So think of like a Lyft, but hyper efficient. And you could imagine that we would be able to decrease all those individual people driving in cars and condense all of our transportation so that we're increasing efficiency of people moving from place to place, but we're also decreasing car emissions and CO2 emissions. Another example is the elimination of roadkill and a decrease in that kind of wildlife-urban interaction that is often detrimental to the wildlife that are getting hit by cars. Cars have to be equipped with sensors to not hit people, but that also applies to wildlife. So autonomous vehicle technology, if they wanted to, could really eliminate roadkill entirely. And like I mentioned, this could result in an increase in public access to parks and all the public health benefits that come with that. Could increase urban wildlife habitat and possibly corridors through the city for urban wildlife to move. And then an increase in green transportation, like biking and walking and all those things that people love to do but can't in our car-dominated infrastructure. And then a decrease in individual car ownership, decrease in local air pollution, smog, that kind of thing, and also a decrease in global CO2 emissions, which is important, of course, for climate change. So that's just a broad overview of the kinds of ideas that are available in this space. But really what we want to do is we want to utilize these advances in autonomous vehicle technology for good. And we want those advances to go towards the collective values that we have as a society and encourage engagement in parks and conservation of biodiversity. So thank you for listening.